340 competitors, one name that wasn't real. The Southwest Regional Karate Open, Bakersfield, California, March 1971. The entry fee was $12, the first prize was $600, but nobody was really there for the money. They were there because Ray Dobbins was there. The story is still told in dojos today, passed the way all the best ones are. Fighter to fighter, in the quiet after training when the mats are still warm and nobody's in a hurry to leave. Whether every detail survived the retelling or not, this is how it comes down. Ray Dobbins walked into the Bakersfield Civic Auditorium on the morning of March 14, 1971, the way a man walks into a room that already belongs to him. He was 6 feet 2 inches tall and 218 pounds, and none of it was decorative. His Shotokan base had been forged over 14 years under Sensei Hiroshi Kameda in Pasadena, a man so demanding that of the 40 students who started with Dobbins, only 6 had lasted more than 2 years. Dobbins had lasted 14. His record in sanctioned competition was 34 wins and 0 losses. He had won the Southwest Regional title 3 consecutive times, 1968, 1969, 1970, and was here to claim a 4th. He had stopped 11 of those 34 fights before the final point was ever called. All 11 ended the same way. Dobbins had a right-side spinning back kick that came from a place most fighters simply did not expect, a pivot so fast that the rotation was already half complete before an opponent registered the shoulder turn that telegraphed it. He didn't hide it, he didn't need to. By the time you saw it coming, it had already arrived. Fighters who faced Dobbins the first time lost to the kick. Fighters who faced Dobbins a second time lost preparing for the kick, so focused on not walking into it that they forgot to win. That was Ray Dobbins' real weapon, not the kick, the idea of the kick. The night before every fight, Dobbins watched film. This was not common practice in regional karate in 1971. Most fighters showed up and relied on instinct and conditioning. Dobbins borrowed a Super 8 projector from his brother-in-law and ran footage of his opponents on a bedsheet pinned to the wall of his garage in Pasadena. He studied their tells, which shoulder dropped before a right hand, which foot shifted before a kick, whether they breathed through their nose or their mouth when they were tired. He arrived at tournaments knowing his opponents before they knew themselves. That was his system. It had never failed him. He arrived at the check-in table at 8:47 that morning, accepted his bracket card from a volunteer who fumbled with the stapler twice and scanned his preliminary opponents. 4 names. He recognized 3 of them from previous tournaments. The 4th, listed in the 4th slot, was registered simply as C. Lee Torrance. He handed the card back. He had no film on C. Lee. That was his first mistake. Bobby LeBeau had been trying to talk Chuck out of this since Tuesday. "I'm telling you," Bobby said, from the passenger seat of Chuck's truck somewhere in Highway 99 outside of Fresno, "somebody's going to recognize you before the semis. Tommy Hirano competes in this circuit. Phil Durant. You think Durant won't know your face?" Chuck kept both hands on the wheel. The desert came at them flat and pale in the headlights. "Maybe," Chuck said. "Maybe?" Bobby turned to look at him. "That's your whole plan? Maybe?" Bobby LeBeau had trained alongside Chuck for 7 years. He had watched Chuck win the Professional Karate Association Middleweight Championship, watched him compete on the same card as Joe Louis and Mike Stone, watched him spar in sessions that would have hospitalized lesser men without either of them blinking. He was not easily impressed by Chuck Norris. But this bothered him. This bothered him specifically. If they figure out who you are in the semis, Dobbins withdraws. The whole thing collapses. He's not going to fight you if he knows it's you. His whole system is built on prep. You're the one guy he has no prep for. Chuck nodded slowly. "Right," Bobby said. "So you understand the problem?" "I understand it." "And?" A long pause. The highway unspooled ahead. "And that's why we go to Bakersfield." Bobby stared at him for a moment, then turned back to the windshield. He didn't say anything else for the next 40 miles. The entry list for the 1971 Southwest Regional Open had 340 names on it. They competed in a converted auditorium that smelled of floor wax and the lingering ghost of a high school graduation held there 2 weeks prior. Folding chairs ringed 3 competition rings marked by tape on the hardwood floor. 900 people filled the seats and the standing room along the back walls. Fighters, coaches, family, and the particular subspecies of martial arts fan who follows regional circuits the way other men follow baseball box scores. The morning session ran 8 preliminary brackets simultaneously. Chuck competed in Ring 2. He wore a plain white gi with no patches. His headgear was borrowed, a size too large, which meant it sat low on his brow, which was not entirely an accident. He had signed his entry form as C. Lee of Torrance. The name was not chosen randomly. It was common enough to disappear into a list of 340. His first opponent was a 19-year-old from Riverside named Marcus Webb, who had 6 tournament wins to his name, and who moved with the jittery energy of someone who had trained hard for 3 months for a moment that was about to be very brief. Webb lasted 1 exchange. Not because Chuck overwhelmed him. Chuck controlled the distance, read the left jab Webb loaded twice before throwing, and stepped to the outside of it with a right-hand counter that stopped 3 inches from Webb's temple. The point was called immediately. The judges in Ring 2 leaned forward slightly. Nobody in the stands noticed. What happened in the next 4 minutes would be the warm-up for what the story always comes back to. Chuck took the semifinal 5 points to 2.
On the other side of the bracket, Dobbins dispatched his semifinal opponent in 3 minutes flat. The spinning back kick landed once, clean, on the solar plexus. A controlled touch in the competition context, but the sound of it carried across the auditorium. Several people winced, several people smiled. Both reactions were appropriate. The finalists were posted on the bracket board at 3:47 p.m. C. Lee, Torrance. Ray Dobbins, Pasadena. The 900 people in the auditorium looked at the board, and then looked at the mat, and then began making their way to better seats. Bobby found Chuck in a hallway off the main floor, sitting on an equipment crate, eyes closed, hands resting on his knees. "Dobbins watched you warm up," Bobby said quietly. "I know. Dobbins is trying to figure out who you are. He'll figure it out." Bobby sat down on the crate beside him. A long moment passed. Somewhere in the auditorium, a referee was announcing the final match. "You could still pull the headgear down," Bobby said. "Bobby, I know. It doesn't matter if he knows," Chuck said. "He still has to fight." Bobby thought about that. Then he stood up, picked up the gear bag, and walked back out to find his seat. The crowd that settled in for the final was different from the crowd that had watched the morning session. Word had moved through the auditorium in the way that word always moves at these events, fighter to fighter, coach to coach, a whisper and a nod toward a mat. By the time Chuck and Dobbins stepped into Ring 2 for the final, the folding chairs around that mat were full, and the standing room behind them was 3 rows deep. 900 people had come to see Ray Dobbins win his 4th title. The referee, a veteran named Carl Hendricks who had worked Southwest Regional Finals for 6 years, called both fighters to center mat and delivered the standard pre-match instructions. First to 5 points, controlled contact, no strikes to the back of the head, stepping out of bounds stops the clock. Dobbins looked at C. Lee across the mat. He had spent the 20 minutes since the bracket was posted studying him from across the room, running everything he'd seen the afternoon. The way C. Lee moved laterally, the timing on the ridge hand against Moss, the stillness between exchanges, the borrowed headgear sitting low on the brow. Dobbins was a man who studied opponents, and what he was seeing didn't fit a regional competitor. The footwork was too clean, the distance management was too precise. The ring awareness was something you built over 10 years, or you never built at all. He told himself it didn't matter. He had 34 wins. He had the kick. He had the system. He told himself that. Carl Hendricks raised his hand. "Begin."
Dobbins opened with what he always opened with, a double jab to test the distance, probing for the reaction that would tell him which side his opponent favored. The first jab stopped 8 inches short of its target. The second was a half step closer. C. Lee did not move, did not lean, did not blink. Dobbins felt the first small thing he couldn't name. He threw the jab a third time, not a probe, a committed one, and simultaneously loaded his right shoulder for the spinning back kick. This was the sequence. This was always the sequence. The jab brought the opponent's guard up, the pivot came out of the jab's shadow, and by the time the kick arrived, the guard was in the wrong place. He had done this to 34 men. The pivot was perfect. The rotation was exactly what 14 years of Shotokan had built it to be. The kick found nothing. C. Lee was no longer where he had been. He had moved forward, not back, forward, inside the arc of the kick, and Dobbins' heels swept through empty air 6 inches past his left ear. At that same moment, a left-hand palm strike came from below Dobbins' line of sight and stopped, completely stopped, 1 inch from his chin. Held there. 2 seconds. 3. Carl Hendricks stood completely still for a moment. Then his hand came up. 5-1.
Chuck stepped back. His arms came to his sides. His breathing was the same as it had been when Hendricks said begin. He did not look at the scoreboard. He looked at Ray Dobbins. The auditorium was loud now. Not a cheer, exactly, but the specific sound of 900 people suddenly needing to say something at once because silence was not adequate. People were on their feet. Some of them were pointing. Some of them were asking questions that had no answer yet. 2 rows from the front, a tournament judge named Walt Perkins leaned forward from his seat and squinted at the man standing calm in the center of ring 2. He had judged regional karate for 9 years. He had seen Chuck Norris compete twice, once in Long Beach, once in Anaheim. He had a good memory for faces. He looked at the white gi, the borrowed headgear now sitting slightly crooked from the exchanges. Walt Perkins stood up. He didn't say it loudly. He said it to the man next to him, a coach named Dennis Farrar who ran a dojo in Fresno. "That's Chuck Norris." Dennis Farrar looked at him, then looked at ring 2. Then Dennis Farrar said it to the man next to him. It moved through the crowd the way a flame moves along a fuse, steady, irreversible, one person to the next, and you could track its progress by watching which section of seats went suddenly still and then suddenly loud again. By the time Carl Hendricks had crossed the mat to raise the winner's hand, the full 900 knew. The sound that came up from those chairs was something that had been building since 8 in the morning, through 340 names reduced to 1, through 4 preliminary bouts and a semifinal and a final that had somehow stayed a secret until the last possible moment. Chuck raised one hand briefly, nodded to Dobbins, and walked off the mat. Ray Dobbins stood in the center of ring 2 for a moment longer than he needed to. He was thinking about the spinning back kick, not this final, all the times before this final. 11 early stoppages, 34 wins. He was thinking about the edge he had always believed the kick gave him, and how in the 90 minutes he had just spent preparing for the wrong fight, the kick had been the least of what defeated him. He had no film on C. Lee, that was what he told himself in the morning, but it wasn't about the film. He found Chuck near the scoring table, where Carl Hendricks was filling out the paperwork. Dobbins extended his hand. Chuck took it. "You came all the way to Bakersfield for a $600 check?" Dobbins said, not angry, genuinely asking. Chuck looked at him. "Wasn't about the check." Dobbins waited. "Then what was it about?" "Needed to find something." A pause. "About me?" Dobbins asked. "About me," Chuck said. Dobbins held his gaze for a moment, then he nodded once. He picked up his gear bag and walked toward the exit. Bobby LeBeau appeared at Chuck's shoulder. "Needed to find something about yourself," Bobby repeated slowly. "You drove 4 hours to Bakersfield to find something about yourself." "2 things," Chuck said. "What's the second thing?" whether I still could when nobody knew who I was. Bobby thought about that the whole drive back to Los Angeles. The story spread the way stories spread in martial arts circles in 1971, person to person, dojo to dojo, carried by the 900 people who were in that auditorium and the 9,000 who wished they had been. Nobody had filmed it. Super 8 cameras were expensive, and nobody had thought to bring one to Ring 2 on a Saturday afternoon in Bakersfield. But the people who were there tell it the same way. Walt Perkins told it for the rest of his life, the moment he recognized the face under the borrowed headgear and the way the name moved through those 900 seats like something catching fire. Ray Dobbins never publicly discussed that afternoon, but fighters who trained with him in the years after 1971 said he changed his preparation system. He started spending less time on film of his opponents and more time on film of himself. He never said why. The $600 check sat on Chuck's kitchen counter in Torrance for 3 days before he deposited it. Bobby asked him once if the experiment had been worth it. 4 hours each way, 1 day, $12 to enter, 6 rounds of fighting under a borrowed name? Chuck wasn't looking up. Every day you train, he said, is a day you're doing it for no one but yourself. The name on your gi doesn't swing the kick. The rank on your wall doesn't redirect the punch. He pulled the wrap tight. He turned to the bag. Bobby didn't write it down. He didn't need to. The tournament record from the 1971 Southwest Regional Open Final lists the winner of the Open Division Final as C. Lee of Torrance. The name was never officially corrected. Some things don't need to be, because what they stand for is already written somewhere no pen can reach.